everyone, and welcome to Train Talk. Today we're going to take a look at another commuter railroad. Since September of 2000, the Sounder has provided commuter rail service along Puget Sound in the greater Seattle metropolitan area. In this episode, we'll examine this interesting commuter operation as well as the story of how the Sounder came to be. We'll finish off with a look into the future at what might be on the horizon for the Sounder. Sounder is a commuter rail service that is owned and managed by Sound Transit. The name of both the commuter trains and the transit agency comes from the Puget Sound, a large Pacific Ocean inlet of brackish and marine waters that sits immediately to the west of the Seattle metropolitan area and surrounding communities. Sounder trains are operated by crews from BNSF Railway, and the passenger train equipment is maintained by Amtrak at their King Street yard in downtown Seattle. Funding for Sounder and Sound Transit is provided by a combination of local taxes in King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. Sounder operations consist of two routes. The 48-mile-long S, or South Line, travels between Seattle, Tacoma, and Lakewood. Intermediate stations include Tukwila, Kent, Auburn, Sumner, Puyallup, and South Tacoma. A second line, known as the N, or North Line, runs for 35 miles between Seattle and Everett, making two stops at Edmonds and Mukilteo along the way. Trains run Monday through Friday only, with the exception of some special weekend trips to Seattle Mariners baseball and Seahawks football games. No service is provided during certain nationally observed holidays, including Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. Standard one-way fares range from $3.25 to $5.75 as of mid-2022. Under normal Monday through Friday operations, 13 round trips are made per day on the S line between Seattle and Tacoma, with most runs extending all the way to Lakewood. On the North Line, 4 round trips are typically operated on weekdays. However, this has been cut back to just 2 trips since the spring of 2020. Like most North American commuter train operations, Sounder uses diesel-electric locomotives to pull sets of passenger cars. The last car in each train is a cab control car with an operator's cab, allowing trains to switch directions without physically turning the entire train consist around. Typically, locomotives are placed on the south end of the train with the cab car on the north end. Trains on the South Line run with 7 car sets. On the North Line, most trains consist of 3 passenger cars, although in the recent past they have occasionally operated with just 2. Speaking of equipment, Sounder boasts a fleet of 14 locomotives and 67 passenger cars. 11 F-59 PHI locomotives were built by the Electromotive Division of General Motors, or EMD for short. They were delivered between 1999 and 2002. All of these locomotives received a major overhaul by EMD's successor, Progress Rail, between 2013 and 2018, which included upgrades to Environmental Protection Agency Tier 3 emissions standards and a modified paint scheme. The other 3 locomotives in the fleet are of type MP40 PH-3C, constructed by Motive Power Inc. in 2013. All of the 67 passenger cars on the roster are Bombardier-built Bi-level coaches and cab cars. 11 of these are Bombardier Series 3 cab cars, and 30 are Series 3 coaches, delivered in between 1999 and 2002. Another 7 are Series 4 cab cars and 10 Series 4 coaches built in 2004. The last 9 cars are Series 10 cab cars that were constructed in 2016 and have a redesigned operator's cab section for enhanced safety. 11 additional Series 10 cars are on order to expand all South Line train sets from 7 to 8 cars. This will result in a 78-car fleet. Train sets on the S Line are stored overnight at the new Lakewood yard. North Line trains are kept on a short storage track located at the Everett station. A total of 7 train sets per day are needed to cover the South Line schedule. North Line trains are normally covered by 4 sets, which is down to just 2 because of the reduced schedule. The commuter railroad, for the most part, operates on tracks that are owned by BNSF Railway and has been subject over the years to a series of operational agreements with the freight rail carrier. These agreements have determined how many commuter trains Sounder can run and what times of the day they can operate. Between Seattle and Everett, Northline trains traverse the BNSF Scenic Subdivision, originally built by the Great Northern Railroad. The route travels in a tunnel under downtown Seattle and then right along Puget Sound for the duration of the trip to Everett. In between Seattle and Tacoma, the South Line utilizes the busy BNSF Seattle Subdivision, a former Northern Pacific rail line. Along the way, Sounder passes by Boeing Field and then due south through the business parks and residential communities of the Kent Valley. At Tacoma Rail Junction, just before reaching the downtown Tacoma Dome station, Sounder leaves BNSF Rails and enters the Lakewood subdivision owned by Sound Transit for the rest of the trip to Lakewood, winding through the industrial southern side of Tacoma. The Lakewood subdivision was completed in 2011 and was actually built from sections of two different rail lines. From the junction to just past Tacoma Dome Station, the line is former Milwaukee Road trackage used and previously owned by freight rail carrier Tacoma Rail, which is a public utility of the city of Tacoma. Just up the hill from the station, the Lakewood subdivision continues onto the former Northern Pacific rails by way of a connector track built by Sound Transit as part of the 2011 upgrade and Lakewood extension project. Link light rail trains, also operated by Sound Transit, provide connections to Sounder at King Street Station in Seattle and Tacoma Dome Station in Tacoma, greatly expanding the overall reach of the system as a regional transportation network. For one of the more recent commuter rail operations to come on the scene in the United States, Sounder has been very well patronized. By 2019, ridership grew to well over 4.5 million passengers annually. This number declined drastically in 2020 and 2021 in a pattern similar to other transit agencies around the nation. It is hoped that ridership numbers will recover to 2019 levels during the next decade. Sounder officially began operations in September of 2000, but the history of commuter rail in the Puget Sound region dates to nearly a century earlier. Prior to Sounder, the Puget Sound Electric Railway operated interurban trains in between Seattle and Tacoma beginning in 1902. After 2.5 decades of operation, the railway shut down and the line was abandoned. Passenger service between Seattle and Tacoma continued to be provided by the nearby Northern Pacific and Great Northern Railroads until Amtrak took over most intercity passenger train operations in the United States in May of 1971. By the late 1980s, passenger rail was beginning a renaissance in the state of Washington. The state had funded studies to expand Amtrak intercity service as well as commuter rail operations in the Puget Sound region. By the early 1990s, more serious efforts had been undertaken to start up a commuter train. In 1993, King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties joined together to create Sound Transit, sometimes formally referred to as the Central Puget Sound Regional Transit Authority. Sound Transit assumed the responsibility for planning and implementing new transit services between the three counties, taking over several existing inter-county bus lines with funding coming from various local sales and property taxes. Planning for future regional transportation systems began immediately. Between January and March of 1995, demonstration commuter train service was operated by the Transit Authority in an attempt to gain public support for a commuter rail system. The program, dubbed Tri-Rail, utilized equipment that was leased from Go Transit in Toronto, Ontario. Temporary platforms were constructed and used for these trips in Tacoma, Kent, Seattle, Edmonds, and Everett. In 1996, the Sound Transit Board approved a plan known as Sound Move, a 10-year proposal for developing new light rail, regional commuter rail, and bus service along with several other transportation infrastructure improvement projects. With voter approval and the formal adoption of the Sound Moves plan in May of 1996, work on the new commuter rail service that would come to be known as the Sounder began. Initial efforts called for an 81-mile-long rail corridor between Everett, Seattle, Tacoma, and Lakewood, with a total of 14 stations, including several to be shared with the anticipated Amtrak Cascades intercity passenger train. Most of the stations that were part of the initial plan would eventually come to fruition. However, the Boeing Access and Georgetown stops south of Seattle and the Ballard and Richmond Beach stations between Seattle and Everett were never constructed. An additional station stop was also planned at the old Amtrak Bond Street station in Everett, but this idea was eventually dropped. The line between Seattle and Tacoma was scheduled to be the first completed segment, expected to be followed shortly thereafter by the Everett to Seattle line and then the Tacoma to Lakewood extension. Sound Transit began work with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad to upgrade the BNSF Seattle subdivision between Seattle and Tacoma and the Scenic subdivision north to Everett. Improvements included better signaling and increased capacity for the additional trains. Next on the list was ordering new rail equipment. The 1995 Tri-Rail demonstrations used F-59 PH locomotives and bi-level passenger cars, and Sound Transit was satisfied enough with this equipment that they decided to order similar locomotives and cars for their budding operation. The slightly newer and streamlined F-59 PHI locomotive was ultimately chosen to go with a fleet of Bombardier Bi-level passenger coaches and cab control cars. 6 F-59s were initially ordered from the Electromotive Division of General Motors, with an additional 5-unit order placed shortly thereafter in anticipation of rapid service expansions. In all, Sound Transit would receive a total of 11 F-59 PHI locomotives, 40 coaches, and 18 cab cars in between 1999 and 2002, costing $107 million for the cars and $26.5 million for the locomotives. Following several years of anticipation, Sounder began commuter rail operations on September 18, 2000. Initial service consisted of just 2 round trips scheduled Monday through Friday, with trains leaving Tacoma early in the morning in the 6 o'clock hour and returning from Seattle at 5:25 and 5:45 in the afternoon. Trains made only 2 intermediate stops at Sumner and Auburn. 3 more stations at Puyallup, Kent, and Tukwila opened in February and March of 2001. An early fixture of the Sounder was special weekend service to Seahawk and Mariners football and baseball games in Seattle. The first few years of Sounder service saw little change to the operation aside from slight schedule modifications to the 2 Tacoma to Seattle round trips. Sounder's 2-year anniversary was marked with the addition of a 3rd round trip on the South Line. Meanwhile, progress on the Seattle to Everett line had stalled. This was due to environmental impact evaluation of various track work projects and longer than expected negotiations with BNSF over the use of their right-of-way. Delays with getting the North Line to Everett up and running left Sound Transit with quite a bit of surplus equipment and nothing to do with it. Over Sounder's first decade of operation, several locomotives and passenger cars were leased and in some cases even sold to other operators. Amtrak Cascades and Vancouver, BC's West Coast Express briefly borrowed a Sounder F-59 in 2001 and 2002. Following this, Virginia Railway Express leased 2 full train sets worth of equipment between 2002 and 2007. This included 12 cars and locomotives 903 and 904. Metrolink in Southern California also leased several cars and locomotive 901, which regularly operated on the Antelope Valley and San Bernardino lines. One of the largest permanent changes to the Sounder equipment roster came in 2002 when Caltrain in the San Francisco Bay Area purchased 7 cab cars and 10 coaches from Sounder for their new express commuter service. Following the sale, cab cars 112 through 118 and coaches 219 through 226 and 229 through 231 were repainted and shipped to San Jose to begin their new life. Finally, after years of negotiation, Sound Transit reached a huge milestone in December of 2003 when a permanent agreement was made between the Transit Authority and BNSF Railway over the use of their tracks north to Everett. Sound Transit would begin service on the North Line from Everett to Seattle with a special Sunday trip on December 21, 2003, to a Seahawks football game. Regular Monday through Friday commuter runs began the next day with 1 round trip per day during the commuter rush hour. Additional trips were to be added over the next several years with a total of 4 anticipated by 2009. The agreement struck with BNSF for the operation of the North Line also included the sale of a 21-mile-long former Northern Pacific branch line between Tacoma and the Nisqually River at the Thurston County line at a price of $32 million. This purchase would pave the way for the future Sounder extension to Lakewood and eventually DuPont, with the possibility of even going as far as Olympia. At the time, it was hoped that operations to Lakewood would begin as early as 2007. Sounder's North Line originally included just one intermediate station stop in Edmonds, which was a pre-existing Amtrak station. Eventually, Mukilteo Station opened in 2008. Over the years, Sounder operations and ridership continued to grow. In 2005, one additional round trip was added to both the North and South Line, bringing the total to 2 and 4 trips respectively. Sounder also launched the Rail Plus program, permitting riders with certain passes to use Amtrak Cascades trains between Seattle and Everett, and any passenger with an Amtrak ticket to use Sounder. An additional 10 coaches and 7 cab cars were delivered in 2007 to replace the cars sold to Caltrain 5 years earlier. This allowed most trains to be expanded from 6 to 7 cars on the South Line. Voters approved a second major funding and tax package for Sound Transit in 2008. Dubbed Sound Transit 2, this round of funding promised to increase the capacity of Sounder trains by expanding all train lengths to 7 cars on the South Line and eventually 8. This funding package set aside money for other improvement projects, including additional locomotives and round trips, station and track improvements, a new maintenance facility in Lakewood, potential new stations at Broad Street and Ballard on the North Line, and a provisional study of a new commuter rail operation between Woodinville and Snohomish on the former BNSF Woodinville subdivision. Continuing into the decade of the 2010s, Sound Transit worked on upgrading the line south of Tacoma to extend service to Lakewood. A new connector track was built between the Tacoma Station in Freight House Square and the former Northern Pacific trackage through South Tacoma, and the rest of the line was also rehabilitated in 2011. The following year, Sounder began running trains to Lakewood. Around this time, the F-59s had reached 10 years of service and were due for midlife overhauls. However, the railroad had so few spare locomotives on hand that they were unable to remove any units for extended periods for major overhaul work. Sound Transit placed an order with Motive Power Inc. for 3 MP40 PH-3C units, and these new locomotives were completed in 2013. With the arrival of the new units, the F-59 fleet was finally sent in for rebuild work. Sound Transit contracted with EMD successor Progress Rail to have each of the 11 locomotives rebuilt and upgraded to EPA Tier 3 emissions standards. The work was done at the Progress Rail facility in Tacoma, with the first unit completed in 2013 and the last in 2018. During this period, improvements were made at 2 Sounder stations. In 2014, Mukilteo received a second platform and a pedestrian overcrossing. A year later, a brand new station complex opened in Tukwila, replacing the original temporary station. That same year, additional construction work began on the Lakewood subdivision. Plans had been made to reroute Amtrak trains on the Lakewood subdivision between Tacoma and Olympia. To support these additional trains, more improvements were made to the route. One of the most significant was a completely rebuilt Tacoma Dome station at Freight House Square and approach tracks to the station. The original alignment crossed a curved wooden trestle. A new concrete span was constructed, straightening out the alignment and adding a second track. Construction on the Lakewood subdivision improvements concluded in 2017. As construction wrapped up on the Lakewood subdivision, Sounder received 7 new Series 10 cab cars that would be used for further service expansions. A third funding package for Sound Transit was approved by voters in 2016. Dubbed Sound Transit 3, this plan largely focused on Link Light Rail improvements, but also gave hope for some upgrades to Sounder service, including a promise to increase train capacity and possibly frequency, as well as an extension of the South Line from Lakewood to DuPont. The future was looking bright for Sounder as the second decade of the 21st century came to a close. Ridership reached an all-time high in 2018, topping 4.6 million for the year. However, that forward momentum was stalled as ridership fell sharply in 2020 and 2021. Even so, Sounder continued into the next decade with plans for growth and improvement. With so many changes over the last 2 decades, what lies around the next bend for the Sounder? In the near term, service will hopefully be restored to 2019 levels on the North Line by the fall of 2023 with the reintroduction of the 3rd and 4th round trips. Effective September of 2022, the full South Line schedule has been restored. Sounder's 11 new bi-level cars, built by Bombardier's successor Alstom, are slated to arrive and enter service starting in the fall of 2022, allowing all South Line train sets to be increased to 8 cars in length. As of late August, the first 2 cars have arrived in Seattle. Most of the major improvement projects anticipated over the next 2 decades have already been laid out and set into action by the new funding that was approved with the vote on Sound Transit 3 in 2018. Included in this funding package are station platform improvements to allow for 10-car trains on the South Line, negotiations with BNSF to potentially increase train frequency, and a plan to extend Sounder service from Lakewood to DuPont. The DuPont extension was initially slated to be completed by 2036. However, this date was later pushed back to 2046. Additional Sounder improvements that have been discussed but were not specifically spelled out as part of Sound Transit 3 are regular weekend service, acquisition of additional locomotives, and expansion of the South Line all the way to Olympia. Despite recent ridership setbacks, the future of Sounder holds a lot of promise moving into the next decade. More trips will continue to improve the service and make Sounder a more dependable mode of transportation in the Puget Sound region. No matter what happens, Sounder has and will continue to cement its legacy in the history of rail transportation of the Pacific Northwest. Well, that's the Sounder. Thanks for joining me for this exploration of Puget Sound's regional commuter train network. To find out more about the Sounder and Sound Transit, visit soundtransit.org. If you have any questions or suggestions of future railroads you'd like to see me cover in upcoming episodes of Train Talk, let me know in the comments section below. As always, a special thanks to all my supporters on Patreon. If you haven't already, don't miss out. Click the subscribe button and check the Receive All Notifications option to receive alerts every time I post to YouTube. There's even more train and railroad themed content on my other social media pages, and remember to stop by every Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time for an all-new railroad themed adventure right here on the YouTube channel. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.